Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking at some excerpts you sent in from the Indonesian translation of Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow.
It's a classic.
Oh yeah, for sure. We'll be pulling out some of the most interesting parts about how our minds work. You know, those aha moments that make you see things a little bit differently.
I think one of the most powerful things Kahneman does is he doesn't just tell us about these mental processes.
Right.
He gives us a framework for understanding them,
Yeah.
like this idea of two systems that are constantly battling it out in our heads. System one and system two.
Yeah, so let's break that down a bit.
Yeah.
System one, that's our autopilot, right? Kind of the fast, intuitive thinking.
Yeah, like super fast.
Yeah, it's what helps us recognize a friend's face instantly or know that 2 plus 2 equals 4 without even really thinking about it.
Exactly. Like imagine you're driving on a familiar route. You're probably not consciously thinking about every single turn or gear change. System one is handling that for you.
Right.
So it's freeing up your mind to do other things.
But doesn't that also make us vulnerable to making mistakes? I mean, what if our intuition is wrong?
Well, that's the trade-off, right?
Right.
Speed and efficiency come at the cost of potential biases.
Okay.
System one relies on what we call heuristics.
Uh-huh.
They're these mental shortcuts that help us make quick judgments.
Okay.
And sometimes those shortcuts, they lead to accurate decisions, but sometimes they can lead us astray.
Do you have an example of how that might trip us up in our everyday lives?
Oh, there's so many examples. Like think about how many times you've judged a book by its cover.
Oh, yeah, literally.
Literally, right? A sleek design or a catchy title can make you think a product is better even though you don't really know anything about its actual quality.
Yeah.
So that's system one, jumping to conclusions based on just these superficial cues.
Okay, so that's system one, fast, intuitive, sometimes a little too quick to judge.
Right.
What about system two then? Is that where we put on our thinking caps and really start to analyze things?
Precisely. System two is the deliberate analytical part of our minds.
Okay.
It's what we engage when we're trying to solve a complex problem,
Right.
make a really important decision, or when we're really trying hard to understand a difficult concept. Remember that multiplication problem Kahneman uses, 17 times 24.
Oh, yeah, that one definitely requires some effort.
Yeah,
I can practically feel my system two straining.
exactly. System two is slower,
Uh-huh.
and it requires more effort, but it allows us to think critically,
Yeah.
question our assumptions, and make more reasoned judgments.
So it's kind of like system one is the impulsive shopper just grabbing whatever catches their eye.
Yeah.
And system two is the one carefully comparing prices, reading reviews before making a purchase.
I love that analogy. That's a great way to put it.
Both are useful, but I guess it's the interplay between them.
Right.
That's really crucial. Knowing when to rely on one over the other.
Absolutely.
How do we even know when to trust our gut versus really engage in that deeper thinking?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Kahneman talks about this idea of cognitive ease.
Hmm.
What exactly does that mean?
So cognitive ease refers to how easily our minds process information.
Okay.
When something is presented clearly, if it already fits with our existing beliefs, or if we hear something repeated often enough,
Mm-hmm.
it creates this sense of fluency, this familiarity.
Okay.
And our brains tend to associate this ease of processing with truth and safety.
So if something feels easy to understand, we're more likely to believe it's true.
Sadly, yes, sometimes.
Even if it isn't?
Even if it isn't.
Wow. Is that how we fall for catchy slogans then? Or those too good to be true headlines?
Exactly. System one loves simplicity and familiarity. It's constantly on the lookout for patterns and shortcuts.
Right.
And a message that's easy to digest, even if it lacks substance, it can kind of slip past our System 2's scrutiny and take root in our minds.
It makes me think about the power of branding and marketing. Like if we see a logo everywhere or a product is constantly being recommended to us, that familiarity can make us more likely to choose it, even if we haven't really stopped to think about why.
That's a great point. It's a perfect example of how this works in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Our minds are wired to conserve energy.
Right.
Familiar things require less mental effort, so we tend to gravitate towards them. And marketers, they know this.
Yeah.
They exploit this by creating a sense of familiarity and positive association with their brands.
Okay, so we've got these two systems. One fast and intuitive, the other one slow and deliberate.
Right.
And we've got this cognitive ease, making us prefer things that feel simple and familiar, even if they're not always the best choices.
Right.
What else does Kahneman reveal about these sort of hidden influences on our thinking? So we've been talking about how our brains crave that cognitive ease,
Right.
but are there other more subtle ways our thinking gets shaped without us realizing it?
Oh, definitely. Kahneman talks about this really fascinating concept called priming. Have
Yeah,
you heard of
I
that?
have, but I'm not sure I totally get it.
So priming, it's like planting a seed in the back of your mind.
Okay.
It's this idea that exposure to one concept can subtly influence your thoughts and actions later on, even if you're not consciously aware of the connection.
So it's like our brains are making these subconscious connections without us knowing.
Exactly. It's almost like a hidden trigger that sets off a chain reaction in your thinking.
So how might that play out in real life?
Well, think about it this way. Have you ever noticed how after you watch a scary movie, you suddenly start to become much more aware of every little creak and shadow in your house?
Oh, for sure.
That's priming at work.
Okay.
The movie has basically primed your mind to be on the lookout for threats.
Hmm.
So it makes you more sensitive to those kinds of stimuli.
So it's not just about like subliminal messages or anything like that.
No.
It's about how our recent experiences can kind of color our perceptions and reactions.
Exactly.
But does it only work with things like fear or anxiety?
Not at all. Priming can influence a whole wide range of thoughts and behaviors. Remember that example from the book with the word eat?
Yeah, where people were more likely to complete SOP as soup instead of soap.
Yes, exactly. It's amazing how such a simple word can unconsciously influence our interpretations.
It is pretty amazing.
Right.
How does this priming effect connect to the idea of cognitive ease then?
That's a great question. They're actually really deeply interconnected. When we're primed with a certain concept, it becomes more cognitively accessible. Like that concept has been moved to the front of our mental filing cabinet, making it easier to retrieve and use.
Okay.
And this ease of access then influences our subsequent thoughts and actions, often without us even realizing it.
So priming makes certain ideas feel more familiar, more true, because our brains are wired to prefer things that are easy to process.
Exactly.
Okay, this is all starting to come together now.
Good. And this has huge implications for how we interpret information and make decisions. We might unconsciously favor ideas or products that have been subtly primed, even if they're not necessarily the best options objectively.
It makes you realize how much of our thinking is happening beneath the surface, shaped by factors we're not even aware of.
Absolutely. And this is really just scratching the surface. Kahneman also explores how things like our mood can influence our susceptibility to certain ideas.
Right.
He argues that when we're in a good mood, our system too, that critical thinking part of our minds, it kind of relaxes its grip a bit.
So when we're feeling all happy and relaxed, we're more likely to just go with the flow and accept things without too much scrutiny.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
When we're in a positive mood, things generally feel safer and easier. Our system one is in its element, and our system two doesn't really see the need to expend extra effort questioning things.
Okay.
So this makes us more vulnerable to persuasion because we're less likely to really critically evaluate the information that we're receiving.
So our good mood creates a kind of halo effect, making us see everything through rose-colored glasses.
Exactly.
I bet this is even more pronounced when we're presented with like a really compelling story or a charismatic speaker.
Oh, absolutely. Think about those times when you've been totally swept up in a captivating story. Whether it's a book, a movie, or even a really well-delivered presentation. When we're emotionally engaged, our critical thinking tends to take a back seat.
It makes me think about those really dynamic speakers who can make even the most outlandish ideas sound convincing.
Yeah?
It's like their enthusiasm and storytelling ability somehow bypasses our critical faculties.
That's a great point. Kahneman actually includes a diagram in the book that kind of maps out all these connections. It shows how good mood leads to ease of thought,
Right.
which then leads to weaker monitoring by system two, and ultimately greater acceptance of suggestions.
It's like a recipe for persuasion.
Exactly.
So we're more likely to be persuaded when we're feeling good, when the message is easy to understand, and when it's delivered in a compelling way.
It seems that way.
So emotions play a much bigger role in our decision-making than we realize.
It appears they do.
Yeah.
Which brings us to another powerful concept Kahneman explores: loss aversion.
Okay.
This is the idea that the pain of losing something is psychologically much more powerful than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about being happy or sad. It's about how our brains are wired to react to those potential losses. How does that play out in our everyday lives? We were talking about loss aversion, that idea that losing something hurts more than gaining something of equal value.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, I remember once I lost a $20 bill and I felt way more bummed out than I would have felt happy finding 20 bucks, just on the street.
It's so true. It does seem kind of irrational, but it's just how our brains are wired. Kahneman suggests this loss aversion is like deeply ingrained in us,
Yeah.
maybe like an evolutionary adaptation.
Mm.
Think about our ancestors, for them, a miscalculation
Uh-huh.
or a risky decision that could mean losing food, shelter, even their lives,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big deal.
right? So it's safer to avoid those potential losses than to chase after potential gains.
It makes sense in that context, but how does this loss aversion thing affect us today, in the modern world?
It shows up in so many areas of life, from financial decisions to personal relationships. Think about investing, for example. People are often more afraid of losing money in the stock market
Right.
than they are excited about the potential gains,
Right.
even if the potential gains are statistically much higher.
So we end up playing it safe,
Yeah.
sticking with these low yield investments just to avoid that feeling of loss.
Yeah, it's a common pattern.
It's fascinating and kind of frustrating at the same time. Like we're being held back by this fear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about money either. Loss aversion influences how we approach relationships, careers, even our health.
So, like staying in a job you hate because you're afraid to lose the security,
Right.
even if a new job could be way more fulfilling.
Or staying in a relationship that's not really working anymore.
Yeah, you're afraid of the pain of a breakup, the loss of what you've built together.
Exactly. Loss aversion makes us cling to the familiar even when it's not really serving us, just to avoid that feeling of loss.
So, how do we overcome that? Is it even possible?
It takes effort, but we can reframe our thinking. Instead of focusing on what we might lose, we could try to focus on the potential gains.
Okay.
It's like instead of seeing a breakup as a failure, you could see it as an opportunity for growth.
So it's like shifting our perspective from what if I lose to what if I win?
Yeah, exactly. It's about challenging those automatic fear-based reactions
Right.
that are driven by loss aversion and choosing to embrace new possibilities.
This has been an amazing deep dive. So much about how our minds work.
Yeah, lots to think about.
System 1 and System 2, the influences of priming mood loss aversion.
It is a lot to take in.
It really is.
But remember, knowledge is power. By understanding these biases, you can start to become more aware of your own thinking patterns
Right.
and then make more conscious, deliberate choices.
It's like Kahneman has given us this secret decoder ring to understand these hidden forces that shape our decisions.
That's a great way to put it.
And now we can start to make them work for us,
Exactly.
not against us.
Here's something to think about now that you know all this. How can you use this knowledge to not just improve your own decision-making, but to better understand the choices that other people make?
That's a great point.
The whole other layer
It is.
to explore.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into thinking fast and slow. We'll see you next time.